What if I told you that a man who spent 25 years mopping floors and pumping gas amassed a fortune larger than most Wall Street executives ever see? What if the guy in the worn-out coat, driving a rusted-out Toyota Yaris held together with duct tape, was secretly worth $8 million? This isn't fiction. This isn't some inspirational movie script. This is the real, documented, verified story of Ronald Read, a gas station attendant and janitor from Brattleboro, Vermont, who died in 2014 and left behind a fortune that shocked everyone who ever thought they knew him. His neighbors thought he was poor. His family had no idea. And when the truth came out, it didn't just surprise a small Vermont town. It went viral across the entire world and rewrote what we thought we knew about building wealth. Stick around, because this story will change how you think about money, patience, and what it actually means to be rich. Ronald James Read was born in 1921 in Dummerston, Vermont, a small rural town where farming and hard, honest labor defined most people's lives. He grew up in the aftermath of the Great Depression, a period that shaped an entire generation's relationship with money. Those who lived through it either became reckless with cash once prosperity returned, or they became fiercely, almost religiously frugal. Ronald Read fell firmly into the second category. He was the first person in his family to graduate high school, and he had to hitchhike 5 miles every day just to get there, rain, snow, or shine. This wasn't a man born into privilege. This wasn't someone with a trust fund or family connections. Ronald Read started with nothing but grit. After serving in World War II, Read returned home and settled into the kind of unremarkable blue-collar life that America rarely celebrates in movies or magazines. He got a job working at a gas station, first as an attendant, and eventually he became a co-owner of a Texaco station in Brattleboro. Later in life, after retiring from the gas station, he took a part-time job as a janitor at the local J.C. Penney department store, a position he held for an astonishing 17 years. Think about that combination for a moment. A gas station attendant, a janitor. These are jobs that, in our society, we often overlook, underpay, and undervalue. We walk past the person mopping the floor without a second glance. We don't imagine they could be sitting on millions. But that's exactly the point of this story. To understand how shocking Ronald Read's story truly was, you need to understand how he lived. This wasn't a secret millionaire cosplaying as a poor man for kicks. This was authentic frugality, ingrained into his very being. Read drove old, beat-up cars. Nothing flashy, nothing that would turn heads. His last vehicle was a modest Toyota Yaris. He wore a safety pin to hold his coat together rather than spend money on a new one or even get it repaired. When he ate at local diners, which he did frequently, he was known to leave the diner staff generous tips, but he himself would often just order coffee or a modest breakfast. He split and stacked his own firewood well into his elderly years, refusing to pay someone else to do work he could do himself. He was a familiar face around Brattleboro, friendly, quiet, and known for spending hours at the local library, reading newspapers and financial publications like the Wall Street Journal. This detail matters immensely, and we'll come back to it. While most of his neighbors saw an old man reading the paper to pass time, Read was actually conducting meticulous research, tracking companies, and making calculated decisions about where to invest his hard-earned money. He never married and had no biological children, though he was famously close with his stepchildren from a marriage that occurred later in his life. He lived alone for years in a modest house that, by all accounts, showed no signs of hidden wealth. No expensive furniture. No secret collections of luxury items. Just a simple, unassuming home belonging to what everyone assumed was a simple, unassuming man. Local attorney and financial advisor Lori Rockwell, who eventually helped manage Read's estate, would later say that nobody, and she meant absolutely nobody, had any idea about the scale of his wealth. Not his friends. Not his poker buddies. Not even most of his family knew the full extent of what he had built. So how exactly did a janitor and gas station attendant accumulate an $8 million fortune? The answer lies in 3 powerful forces: time, discipline, and compound interest. Ronald Read began investing decades before his death, by some accounts, as early as the 1950s and 1960s. This is crucial to understanding his success. He wasn't chasing get-rich-quick schemes or trying to time the market with risky day trading. He was playing the longest game imaginable, treating his investment portfolio the way a farmer treats soil, with patience, consistency, and the understanding that real growth takes years, even decades, to fully manifest. Reed favored what financial experts now call blue-chip stocks, shares in large, stable, well-established companies with strong track records. His portfolio, when finally revealed after his death, included over 95 different stocks. These weren't speculative tech startups or trendy investments. These were companies like Procter & Gamble, General Electric, Johnson & Johnson, J.P. Morgan Chase, and other household names that had proven their staying power over generations. He also invested in dividend-paying stocks specifically, which meant that even without selling a single share, his portfolio was consistently generating income that he could then reinvest, creating a snowball effect that grew larger and larger with each passing year. This strategy, known as dividend reinvestment, is one of the most powerful, if unglamorous, wealth-building tools available to everyday investors. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't create Instagram-worthy success stories overnight. But over 40, 50, 60 years, it creates millionaires. What made Reed's approach particularly remarkable was his research methodology. He didn't have access to Bloomberg terminals or expensive financial advisors. Instead, he relied on paper stock certificates, physical documents proving ownership, and he tracked his investments using pen, paper, and newspaper clippings. Financial publications and the library became his primary tools for due diligence. He read annual reports. He followed company performance over years, not days. He understood something that many modern investors, chasing quick gains and following social media hype, completely miss. That real wealth is built slowly, through patient ownership of quality assets, not through frantic trading or emotional decision-making. Local banker and friend, Ronald's financial confidant over the years, would later reveal that Reed's investment strategy was almost monk-like in its discipline. He rarely, if ever, sold his positions once he believed in a company. He held through market downturns, through recessions, through the natural ebbs and flows of the stock market that caused so many investors to panic and sell at exactly the wrong moments. Here's where Ronald Reed's story becomes not just inspiring, but instructive, a blueprint that anyone, regardless of income level, can actually apply to their own life. Reed's annual salary, even at the height of his career, was modest. We're talking about wages appropriate for a gas station worker and later a part-time janitor, likely never exceeding what most Americans would consider a comfortable middle-class income, and for much of his life, far below that. Yet he managed to save and invest enormous portions of his income year after year, decade after decade. How? Through a lifestyle so frugal it bordered on ascetic, but was clearly a source of genuine satisfaction for him rather than a source of deprivation or misery. He didn't need the latest car. He didn't need designer clothes. He didn't need to eat at expensive restaurants or take lavish vacations. His pleasures were simple: chopping wood, reading at the library, playing checkers or cards with friends, and quietly, methodically building his portfolio stock by stock, dividend by dividend. This is perhaps the most important lesson from Reed's entire story. Wealth accumulation isn't primarily about how much money you make. It's about the gap between what you earn and what you spend, combined with what you do with that surplus over time. Consider this. If Reed had earned the same modest salary but spent every dollar of it, or worse, gone into debt trying to maintain appearances of wealth he didn't have, he would have died with nothing, just another anonymous, hard-working American who never got ahead. Instead, because he consistently lived below his means and invested that difference wisely, he died one of the wealthiest people in his entire community, hiding in plain sight the whole time. This is a stark contrast to what we often see today. Instagram influencers flaunting rented luxury cars, people going into crushing debt to maintain appearances, and a culture that often equates visible spending with success. Ronald Reed represents the exact opposite philosophy. True wealth is often invisible, quietly compounding while the world rushes past, distracted by flashier, emptier displays. When Ronald Reed passed away on June 5, 2014, at the age of 92, his death initially seemed like just another quiet passing in a small Vermont town. A beloved elderly man who had lived a long, simple life would be missed by friends and family, but wouldn't make headlines. Then his will was read. The scale of his fortune stunned everyone. Ronald Reed, the janitor, the gas station attendant, the man who wore a safety-pinned coat and drove a beaten-up car, had accumulated an estate worth approximately $8 million. Let that sink in for a moment. $8 million. His stock portfolio alone contained holdings in 95 different companies, meticulously built over decades. This wasn't found money or an unexpected inheritance he'd received from some rich relative. This was money he had earned, saved, and grown himself through decades of disciplined, unglamorous investing. But what Red did with this fortune after his death revealed even more about his character than the fortune itself. He left the majority of his estate, approximately $6 million, to Brooks Memorial Library in Brattleboro, the very same library where he had spent countless hours reading and researching his investments over the decades. This single donation was the largest gift the library had ever received in its entire history, and it would go on to fund a significant expansion and renovation of the facility. He also left approximately $1.2 million to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, the local medical facility that had cared for the community, including presumably himself, over the years. Think about the symbolism here. The place where he taught himself everything he knew about investing, the library, received the largest portion of his wealth. He was essentially paying forward the very institution that had empowered him to build his fortune in the first place. It's almost poetic. Knowledge had made him wealthy, and in death, he ensured that knowledge would remain accessible to others in his community for generations to come. The remaining portions of his estate went to family members and other smaller local charitable causes, but the bulk of his wealth, the vast majority of those millions built penny by penny, dividend by dividend, decade by decade, went directly back into the community that had shaped him. When news of Ronald Reed's story broke publicly, first through local Vermont news outlets, and then rapidly spreading through national media including major financial publications like the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and countless others, it captured the public imagination in a way that few financial stories ever do. Why did this story resonate so powerfully with people across the world? Because it challenged nearly every assumption our society holds about wealth and success. We're bombarded daily with images of billionaires who inherited fortunes, tech entrepreneurs who struck gold with a single innovative idea, or celebrities whose wealth comes from fame and visibility. Ronald Reed offered a radically different narrative, one where an ordinary, working-class man, through nothing more than patience, discipline, and consistent decision-making, built a fortune that rivaled or exceeded many of these more celebrated paths to wealth. Financial advisors and wealth management professionals seized on his story as a teaching tool, using it in seminars and articles to illustrate the power of long-term investing, dividend reinvestment, and living below one's means. Books were written referencing his approach. His story became a staple example in personal finance courses and financial literacy programs. What made it even more powerful was the stark contrast with certain other high-profile wealth stories that broke around similar times. Stories of lottery winners who blew through millions in mere years, or wealthy heirs who squandered inherited fortunes through reckless spending. Ronald Reed's story stood in direct opposition to these cautionary tales, offering instead a blueprint for sustainable, ethical, patient wealth building that virtually anyone could theoretically replicate, regardless of their starting income. Financial journalist Jason Zweig, who wrote about Reed's story for the Wall Street Journal, noted that Reed's success wasn't due to any special insider knowledge or extraordinary luck. It was fundamentally about behavior, about the psychological discipline to save consistently, invest wisely in quality companies, and resist the urge to spend impulsively or chase short-term gains. Let's dig deeper into what actually made Ronald Reed's approach so effective, because there are specific, actionable principles here that extend far beyond just save your money. Reed began investing decades before his death, which means his money had incredible amounts of time to compound. Albert Einstein allegedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, and Reed's story is perhaps the most vivid real-world illustration of this principle in recent memory. A dollar invested at age 25 has vastly more time to grow than a dollar invested at age 45 or 55. Reed's decades-long investment horizon meant that even modest annual returns, compounded year after year after year, eventually snowballed into millions. This underscores a critical lesson for younger viewers watching this video. Start now, regardless of how small the amount, because time itself is one of your greatest assets. Reed's preference for dividend-paying stocks meant his portfolio was constantly generating cash, which he would then reinvest to purchase additional shares. This creates a compounding effect that's fundamentally different from simply buying and holding stocks that don't pay dividends. Each dividend payment, when reinvested, buys more shares, which then generate their own dividends, which buy even more shares. Over decades, this creates exponential rather than linear growth. Emotional discipline and avoiding panic selling. One of the most underappreciated aspects of Reed's success was his apparent emotional discipline during market downturns. Throughout his decades of investing, he would have lived through numerous recessions, market crashes, and periods of significant economic uncertainty, including events like the 1970s oil crisis, Black Monday in 1987, the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s, and the 2008 financial crisis. Many investors, driven by fear during these periods, sell their holdings at exactly the wrong time, locking in losses and missing the eventual recovery. Reed's buy-and-hold philosophy, maintained consistently through market volatility, allowed him to benefit from the market's long-term upward trajectory rather than being whipsawed by short-term panic. Perhaps the most replicable lesson from Reed's story is the fundamental principle of living below your means. This doesn't necessarily mean living as frugally as Red did, wearing safety-pinned coats or driving decades-old cars. But it does mean creating a sustainable gap between income and expenses, and then directing that surplus toward wealth-building investments rather than immediate consumption. Reed's story demonstrates that this principle can work even at relatively modest income levels, given enough time and consistency. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep and what you do with what you keep. Ronald Reed's story doesn't exist in isolation. Financial researchers and authors have documented similar patterns among other unexpected millionaires throughout history. Individuals from working-class backgrounds who, through similar principles of patient investing and frugal living, built substantial wealth without ever achieving high income or public recognition. Thomas Stanley and William Danko's influential book The Millionaire Next Door, published in 1996, actually predicted and explained this exact phenomenon years before Reed's story became public. Their research found that many actual millionaires in America don't live in mansions or drive luxury cars. They often live in modest homes in middle-class neighborhoods, drive practical vehicles, and maintain frugal lifestyles specifically because these habits allow them to save and invest larger portions of their income. Stanley and Danko's research revealed that many people who appear wealthy, those with big houses, luxury cars, and visible displays of affluence, often have surprisingly little actual net worth because they've spent their income on maintaining appearances rather than building assets. Conversely, many people who don't appear wealthy at all, like Ronald Reed, have quietly built substantial net worth precisely because they avoided these expensive displays of status. This concept, sometimes called stealth wealth, represents a fundamentally different relationship with money than what mainstream culture often celebrates. It prioritizes long-term financial security and freedom over short-term social signaling and immediate gratification. Other examples of similar hidden millionaire stories have emerged over the years. Individuals like Grace Groner, a secretary who invested in her employer's stock decades ago and left millions to charity upon her death, or various other unassuming individuals who quietly built fortunes through similar principles of patient, disciplined investing combined with frugal living. What connects all these stories is a shared philosophy. Wealth building is fundamentally more about behavior and patience than about intelligence, luck, or even income level. While certainly having a higher income provides more capital to work with, the behavioral principles that Reed exemplified, consistent saving, patient investing, avoiding lifestyle inflation, and emotional discipline during market volatility, are accessible to people across virtually all income levels. Now, in the interest of providing a complete and balanced picture, it's worth acknowledging some important context and even mild critiques of the Ronald Reed as universal blueprint narrative that emerged in media coverage. First, Reed's story unfolded over an extraordinarily long time horizon, many decades. This isn't a criticism of his approach, but rather an acknowledgement that his success required extreme patience and a very long life. Not everyone has 50 to 60 years to let investments compound, and the specific results Reed achieved aren't necessarily replicable on shorter timelines. Second, some financial experts have pointed out that Reed benefited from investing during a historically strong period for American stock markets. The mid-20th century through the early 2000s, despite various downturns and crises, generally represented a period of substantial overall market growth. While this doesn't diminish his discipline and wisdom, it's worth noting as context, market conditions matter, even if behavior matters more. Third, and perhaps most importantly from a personal life perspective, Reed's extreme frugality raises interesting questions about balance and quality of life. While his story is undeniably impressive from a pure wealth-building perspective, some who discuss his story wonder whether such extreme frugality, patching coats with safety pins rather than replacing them, for instance, despite having millions of dollars, represents a healthy relationship with money, or whether it reflects scarcity mindset patterns rooted in his Depression-era upbringing that persisted even when they were no longer necessary. This isn't to criticize Reed's choices, By all accounts, he seemed genuinely content with his simple lifestyle, and his eventual philanthropic gifts suggest he understood the value of money beyond mere accumulation. But it does raise an interesting question worth pondering. What's the point of building wealth if you never allow yourself to enjoy any of it during your lifetime? This is a nuanced consideration, not a condemnation. Different people find fulfillment in different ways, and clearly, Reed found genuine satisfaction in his simple life, his research, and ultimately in his ability to make substantial charitable contributions to institutions he cared about. But for viewers applying lessons from his story to their own lives, it's worth considering a more balanced approach, one that still prioritizes saving and investing, but perhaps allows for more enjoyment of resources along the way, rather than waiting until death to release wealth back into the world. Today, Ronald Reed's name lives on, quite literally, in Brattleboro, Vermont. The Brooks Memorial Library underwent significant renovations and expansions thanks to his generous gift, ensuring that future generations of Vermont residents will have access to the same resources: books, newspapers, financial publications, and quiet spaces for learning that helped shape his own financial education decades earlier. Brattleboro Memorial Hospital similarly benefited from his generosity, using funds to improve healthcare services for the very community that had been his home for his entire life. Beyond these tangible, local impacts, Reed's story has taken on a broader cultural significance as a touchstone example in discussions about personal finance, wealth building, and the true nature of success. Financial educators continue to reference his story in classrooms, seminars, and media content, much like this very video, because it offers such a powerful, real-world illustration of principles that can sometimes feel abstract or theoretical when discussed in purely academic terms. His story serves as a powerful reminder that wealth isn't always visible, that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that some of the most financially successful people among us might be the very individuals we walk past every day without a second glance: the janitor, the gas station attendant, the quiet person reading newspapers at the local library. Ronald Reed died without fanfare, in the same modest house he'd lived in for years, in the same small Vermont town where he'd spent his entire life. He never sought publicity or recognition for his financial success. He never wrote a book about his investment strategies or appeared on television talk shows boasting about his wealth. In fact, if he hadn't left such substantial gifts to local institutions, gifts that necessitated public disclosure of his estate, the world might never have known about his remarkable financial achievement at all. Perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. Ronald Reed wasn't investing to prove anything to anyone, or to achieve some external validation of success. He was simply, quietly, consistently building something, dividend by dividend, share by share, year after year, because he understood, perhaps intuitively, perhaps through careful study, the fundamental principles that govern real wealth creation. He understood that time is more valuable than timing. That consistency beats intensity. That patience, in a world obsessed with instant gratification, remains one of the most powerful financial tools available to absolutely anyone, regardless of their starting circumstances. The next time you're tempted to make an impulsive purchase, chase a trendy investment, or compare your financial journey to the curated highlight reels of influencers and celebrities on social media, remember Ronald Reed. Remember the janitor with the safety-pinned coat who was quietly worth $8 million. Remember that real wealth is often invisible, built slowly and methodically by people who understand that the tortoise, not the hare, wins the race. His story isn't just about money. It's about values, about patience, discipline, humility, and ultimately, generosity. It's about understanding that true financial freedom isn't about how much you spend or how impressive your lifestyle appears to others, but about the quiet security and eventual impact you can create through consistent, disciplined choices made over time. Ronald Reed left this world having given away more money than most people will ever see in their lifetimes, all while living more simply than most of us would ever consider acceptable. And in doing so, he left behind something far more valuable than his $8 million fortune. He left behind a blueprint, a true story that proves financial success isn't reserved for the privileged, the lucky, or the exceptionally talented. It's available to anyone willing to embrace patience, discipline, and a long-term perspective on wealth building. If you found this story as inspiring as I did while researching it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we've got many more incredible stories of hidden wealth, unexpected fortunes, and the fascinating psychology of money coming to this channel. Drop a comment below telling me what surprised you most about Ronald Reed's story. And let me know if there are other hidden millionaire stories you'd like us to cover in future videos. Until next time, remember, real wealth often whispers, while fake wealth screams. Choose wisely which one you're building.